All right, Jimmy, out along with Paul Stone each and every week with college football best bets. We got some good ones. Had a great one last week. Oregon, Washington did not disappoint. And of course, game management. We talk about it each and every week. Had fortunate with a push with -3. Felt fortunate there. Let's get right to them and start with the big one. Noon kickoff, Eastern time in the Big Ten, and a couple of undefeated Big Ten teams. The big three out of the East, Ohio State at -4 against Penn State at home in Columbus. Paul, what was the look-ahead line? We know it had to be bigger than this back in the summertime, huh?
Yeah, I didn't bet this game, Jimmy, but off the top of my head, I'm thinking it was 8 or 9, something in that vicinity. That sounds right. So certainly, it is lower at 4 points than we had way back in the summertime, and even a little bit earlier than that at some stores.
Yeah. So, all right. So, looking at 4 now with Penn State. Well, we know James Franklin's going to beat the spread when he can. So he's bully ball, but he really struggles against the highly ranked teams over the course of his stay in Happy Valley.
Yeah, in my handicap of most games, Jimmy, I'm going to be examining pertinent statistics and analytics and things of that sort, but sort of more of a mathematical approach, you might say. But in Saturday's Penn State, Ohio State showdown, I'm going to put my mathematics textbook down. I'm going to pick up my history textbook. And I know it's probably been covered on some of your podcasts and so forth, and it'll be covered nationwide, probably ad nauseum. But the numbers, it's just hard to get behind, to ignore, rather, James Franklin's performance historically since taking over in 2014 against not only Ohio State, but against Michigan. Against those big two, Franklin only 4-14 straight up, 1-8 against Ohio State. Additionally, only 2-15 straight up against top 10 teams, only 1-10 versus the top 5. Penn State this season, though, and that's what we're talking about. It's a unique season, a new year, and they've been impressive to this point. But you have to ask yourself, who have they played? And they really hadn't played anybody. Their schedule ranked 77th currently by Jeff Sagrin. This is Drew Aller's first road start outside the state of Illinois. He started road games both at Northwestern and Illinois, so one could argue this step up in class really represents his first true road test of his career. And if Aller doesn't, come up big or at least play really well in the passing game, they're going to be relying heavily on that run game featuring Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. And definitely that's one of the best running back tandems in all of college football. But the Buckeyes quite good against the run, only allowing 3.2 yards per carry. Kyle McCord for Ohio State. He's really stepped it up in the pass game. He's getting better. Just, until I get something different than what I've seen historically from James Franklin in these kind of games, I'm going to keep bucking him. I like Ohio State -4 over Penn State.
Young quarterbacks, it's an old angle at the college level. The young quarterbacks making their first road start in a hostile environment. Now, do we have to judge whether or not Champaign or Evanston are hostile? But certainly Columbus will be on Saturday afternoon. Get extra value this football season with BetRivers Squares. You can win up to $10,000 in bonus money. Bet $10 in same-game parlays on any game with the Squares icon to earn a square. Brought to you by our friends over at BetRivers. You're not shying away from the big ones. Let's go down to T-Town, baby. Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Rare revenge spot for Nick Saban and his Alabama Crimson Tide. In Tennessee, well, it's not just a system with Josh Heupel. He misses his quarterback, Hendon Hooker, from last year. This is not the same offense. Need a punt return late for the difference against A&M last week. Bama -8.5 at home, a 3:30 Eastern kickoff.
Yeah, you took a lot of my talking points, and they're all on the mark in my opinion. I just really like how this sets up for Alabama on a number of fronts. First of all, Alabama as a team's getting better, and much of that is related to the development at the quarterback position of Jalen Milroe. His last 4 games, he's averaged 11.3 yards per pass attempt, so they're not passing the ball a ton, but he's doing a real good job taking care of the football better in those last 4 games, 6 touchdowns against only 2 interceptions. And you talked about the rare revenge spot for Nick Saban. I think he's got still a pretty good memory, and he remembers that 52-49 loss last year in Knoxville to Tennessee, which basically derailed the Tide's playoff hopes. And if you remember that game, which I'm sure you do, Alabama leads Tennessee 49-42 with 4 minutes remaining. They've got a fourth down play. Seemed like it's about from the 20 or the 25. Kool-Aid McKinstry intercepts the ball in the end zone, returns it deep into Tennessee territory, only to be negated by what I felt, and I don't talk about officiating much, but a questionable pass interference call against Malachi Moore. And whether it was the right call or the wrong call, I guarantee you Alabama remembers that play. They remember the game. I'm sure Nick's talked about it quite a bit this week there in Tuscaloosa. So they will, they will be, I think, bringing what I call their collective team psyche. I talk about all the time, a college football team, they have 12 regular season games, and they don't bring 8.5% to each of those 12 games. They don't bring a collective amount of energy and passion and preparation. Some games get less, some games get more. I think this is a game that gets more. As you pointed out, they're just not quite the same team this year. Joe Milton's been, he's been pretty good, but he's certainly not Hendon Hooker. They certainly lack the vertical pass game threat with no Jalen Hyatt. Their top receiver this year, Brew McCoy, is out for the year. Just not the same unit. I don't know where they stand statistically in this category, but a couple of weeks ago, the Volunteers ranked last in the SEC, 14 out of 14 teams in explosive pass plays of 20 or more yards. So that just shows you kind of where that passing game is right now. They actually run the ball 56% of their offensive plays, but Alabama defends the run well, only allowing 3 yards per carry. They have not had a running back. Alabama rushed for 70 yards against them all year. The quarterback at South Florida, Byron Brown, rushed for 92, I think. But no running back. I think the top running back, 68 yards. So if Tennessee's trying to run it on the Tide, that might not go very well. Alabama, minus 8.5 over Tennessee.
Yeah, and what Heupel's doing too, it's almost like watching a Matt Canada offense, and not to get the Steelers fans all riled up, but I mean a lot of misdirection, a lot of eye candy, a lot of just trying to disguise and confuse defensive fronts instead of just going right at them. A lot of extended handoffs laterally, in these little swing passes, or then taking shots downfield, but just not trusting Joe Milton in the intermediate zone at all. So, and actually they're better. Yards per play defense is much better this year. Not the shootout, Bryce Young versus Hooker, that we saw last year. No question about that. Let's stay in the SEC, and uncharacteristically, another couple of teams are looking at kind of involved in some shootouts. South Carolina was in a wild one last week. Give him credit. I was wrong on this one. I didn't think Graham Mertz can play. He's playing better for Florida after that highly embarrassing, high-profile game on Thursday night in Salt Lake City. Game management where Sunbelt Billy was kind of looking crooked at times. But now you're looking at Columbia here. Missouri hosting. Missouri only one loss, that wild game against LSU at home. 7.5 and 59.5 at home against South Carolina. You're more interested, Paul, in the total here, that 59.5.
Yeah, but a formula that I use, Jimmy, and I've utilized for years, projects that this game's going to have 142 plays and, more importantly, 68 points. Projects Missouri to finish with 572 yards. And the Tigers, they're really clicking offensively. They've scored 30 or more points in each of their past 5 games. They rank in the top 30 nationally in scoring offense at 33.7 points per game, and in total offense at 445 yards per game. And their passing game is really flourishing. Brady Cook, their quarterback, and their 5-star recruit out of East St. Louis, Illinois, Luther Burden, true sophomore wide receiver, 56 receptions for 808 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's really living up to that 5-star billing. Last week against Kentucky, he only finished with 2 catches for 15 yards. But prior to that game, in his previous 3 games, he had double-digit reception games in all 3 of those games prior to Kentucky, 140 receiving yards or more in all 3 of those games. So he is a guy that has to be accounted for. He's a tough customer. In South Carolina, unfortunately for the Gamecocks, they don't defend the pass very well. They rank 116th in defensive yards per pass attempt at 8.7 yards per attempt. So I think they're going to have a lot of trouble defending Burden. They're also really good offensively. I mean, at least fairly good. South Carolina can score. They've scored a total of 96 points in their last 3 games against Mississippi State, Tennessee, and Florida. I look for a lot of points on Saturday there in Columbia. Take the over 59.5, South Carolina and Missouri.
Yeah, South Carolina may, some of their depth also may be, effective. They had 20 players transfer out of their program in the offseason that may contribute to their 110 yards per play defense, too. So they, a lot of and you talked about their yards per attempt defense, so one of the poorer defenses in the SEC. And keep in mind that Missouri LSU snap count was a little bit skewed also because LSU was trying to anything to help out their defense. As great as Jaden Daniels is playing, they ran it 2-1 against Missouri to try and play keep away and keep their defense off the field as much. So contributing to that number there. All right. Well, how about this, man? All our friends in Las Vegas are happy. Huh? They got a winning football team. What about this one? Barry Odom. We talked about that Arkansas missing both of those coordinators. Briles going to TCU and Odom taking a job at UNLV. Nobody could have anticipated this, though. What a job he has done. But, man, when teams get on a roll, winning cures a lot of things. UNLV now at home, 7.5 and 62 at Colorado State. 4 p.m. local kickoff in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Barry Odom. First of all, I know UNLV's program, obviously a little bit under the radar in the Mountain West. But as anybody, if you look at it and, give all 133 teams, rather, an equal opportunity at the billing, has anybody done a better head coaching job this year than Barry Odom? He inherits a program suffering from 9 straight losing seasons. They're 5-1 at this point. Their only loss was there to Michigan week 2, 35-7. Fairly respectable there. But they've handled business. They have won their games. They played a predictably easy schedule, only ranked 134th by Jeff Sagarin. But those other 5 games, they've won by an average of 18.4 points per game. None of those 5 victories by fewer than 17 points. So they've really taken care of business. Rebels on a good trajectory right now. If you remember, I think it was for 3 weeks, Bobby Petrino was Barry Odom's first hire as offensive coordinator. But then, of course, the Aggies come calling, and
That's right.
Bobby Petrino decides to go to College Station and get with Jimbo Fisher there, and maybe he wishes he would have stayed in Vegas at this point. But I think for UNLV, it turned out for the best because who they hired, their second choice, Brennan Marion, former NFL receiver who was last year the receivers coach at the University of Texas. He's obviously done a big-time job there. I think they've scored 40 points in all their 5 victories, at least 40 points. So they have really been rolling. Then on the other side, something I really like about this game is Colorado State's frame of mind. Last week we all saw it, the dramatic 31-30 victory at home over Boise State. They trailed that game 30-10 with 4.5 minutes remaining. The Rams score 3 touchdowns in the final 4 minutes, 1 second. They win the game on the 33-yard deflected pass on the final play from scrimmage. Actually add the extra point to get the victory there. But just an incredible victory for Colorado State. Their first ever victory over Boise State, I might add. The fans stormed the field, euphoria, mass celebration, incredible win for Jay Norville. I could go on, but I like to say what comes up must go down. And it's going to be a tough situation coming into UNLV, playing a Rebel team that's really playing at a high level. And their quarterback, Colorado State's quarterback, who's really exciting to watch. He throws a lot of touchdowns, throws a lot of interceptions too, especially on the road. In 3 road games this year, Colorado State's quarterback, Fowler Nicolosi, he's thrown 7 interceptions. So you got to figure that the Rebels, who've intercepted 9 passes this year, might pick a couple off, might win that all-important turnover battle. I like the Rebels -7.5 there at Allegiant over Colorado State.
Well, one of the ways you evaluate Coach of the Year honors and things like that, how do they match up? How they exceed expectations. Barry Odom's UNLV Running Rebels can go over their win total at 5.5 with a win on Saturday against Colorado State. It was 5.5. 5-1 on the year, like you said. Paul scored 40 points in all of their wins. Their one loss might be the best team in the country, the Michigan Wolverines, and they covered that one in Michigan as well. Each and every week, Paul Stone's best bets right here on the Sports Bettor's Paradise on the BetRivers Network. For Paul Stone, I'm Jimmy Ott. We'll see you next week.